Hi everyone, my name is Anne-Kathrin Fritsch, Senior Client Service Manager at Potentiate, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our session, A Beginner's Guide to CX. Today, Ray Poynter, our Chief Research Officer, will start with a short introduction to CX and present not only the historical perspective, but as well the framing of CX programs, trends we see in CX, and the differences between market research and customer experience. Jodie Roberts, our Client Communications and Development Director, will put CX in action. She will take you through the key benefits and show you how to implement a CX program in your company successfully. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them via the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen, and we are delighted to answer them at the end. Also, you will receive a recording of this webinar after today's session so that you can share it with your colleagues if needed. We will then open up the floor for questions, so please write down and submit your questions via the Q&A option in the webinar. During the presentation, including the Q&A session, everyone will remain on mute. So again, if you have any questions, please enter them via the Q&A tool. Thanks very much. I now hand over to Ray.
Hi, Ray Poynter here, and welcome to A Beginner's Guide to Customer Experience. So what do we mean by customer experience, this term CX? It's the total customer experience. So the path to purchase, how the purchase went, how the usage of the product and the service worked, the environment it creates. So it's the whole picture leading up to, during and after the use or purchase of a service or product. It includes touchpoint surveys. So if you have a meal and you get a survey about it or some questions about it straight afterwards, that's a touchpoint survey. If you have something delivered and then you are asked some questions about it, that is a touchpoint survey. We also have periodic surveys, so every 3 months, every year, or so on. So if you are dealing with a bank on a regular basis, you might not want to do some feedback every single time you deal with the bank, so they might talk to you monthly or quarterly or once a year. There are also service audits where you go to as many of your customers as possible to get an overall picture. And maybe you're only going to do that once every few years. Or you might do it with specialist methods such as mystery shopping to get part of that experience in there. We use measures such as the Net Promoter Score, which we're going to explain a bit more, and measures like customer satisfaction. And this CX can be expanded, so we can use qualitative methods to get richer information. We can listen to and read and react to social media, and we can use ethnography to watch what people are actually doing when they're experiencing a product or a service. So what I'm going to do is start with an historical perspective. How did we get to CX as we see it today? So I'm going to start with customer satisfaction research back in the 1970s, the introduction of the Net Promoter Score, one or two alternatives, some different perspectives, and then the rise of CX as we see it today. So if we go back to the 1970s, the start of my life in the research industry, we had customer satisfaction research, and the academics have this very interesting phrase that they use about it, which is post-choice constructs. Because after we buy something, we can rationalize it, or we can get post-purchase remorse. So there are some challenges if you simply look at the satisfaction of the process after somebody has successfully bought something, they have used something, or whatever. So that is one of the things that changes over the next 50 years I'm going to be talking about. How did we collect that data back in the 70s? We collect it with postal surveys. We would post off information, telephone surveys. We would use face-to-face. If you went to a hotel, they would leave the card in the room. If you went to a restaurant, they might hand you a card to fill in. We did those ad hoc, so we might do an occasional study to see what sort of level of customer satisfaction we had. We might do them periodically, every 3 months, 6 months, a year, or touch points. For example, those cards given as you left the restaurant or you finished your stay at the hotel, those were touch point surveys. The most important question in those studies tended to be your overall satisfaction. Quite often, if you stayed at a hotel, they would ask your satisfaction with the restaurant, your satisfaction with the room, and so on. So we'd get satisfaction with different parts of the process, but we would almost always ask, what is your overall satisfaction? And that would typically be the key measure. And right from the 1970s, there was quite a lot of work in trying to identify what were the drivers of satisfaction. So if somebody was happy overall, and they were happy with the restaurant, and they were happy with the check-in, but they were not happy with the swimming pool, we would say the swimming pool is not a driver of satisfaction, because people were capable of being not happy with that and still happy overall. And we would use techniques such as regression or even structural equation modeling. One of the real tensions starting in the 1970s and right through to today is this issue of anonymity. Almost all market research is done on the basis of participant anonymity. But that doesn't really work in CX or customer satisfaction, and it doesn't really work for two groups of people. If you are the hotel manager, you want to know how to fix the problem. If you are a car dealer, you want to know how to fix the problem. It's not enough to be told there was a problem. You really want to know, how can I fix it for the individuals who mentioned it? And the second group of people who didn't necessarily want the study to be anonymous were the participants. If I tell you that the package was delivered badly, I kind of expect you to fix the problem. I don't want you to say, thank you very much, I'm going to protect your anonymity and make sure your problem is not fixed. So right from the outset, there was this pressure to make customer satisfaction research not anonymous. Initially, most of it was anonymous, but the trend was away from that anonymity. The first really big change just after the year 2000 was the arrival on the scene of the Net Promoter Score. It started with this paper in the Harvard Business Review by Frederick Reichheld, and it said you just needed this one number, and it asked people to say, how likely are you to recommend this product or this service to your friends, your colleagues, relatives, peers, whatever might be the right reference set. And the scale that is most typically used is 0 to 10. And what the NPS does is it takes anybody who says 9 and 10 and it calls them a promoter. Anybody who is a 0 to 6 is a detractor. And the Net Promoter Score is the difference in the percentage of people who were promoters and the percentage of people who were detractors. So we end up with this number. Now, there have been lots of studies that show that this is not the best measure of the customer experience. It's not the best measure of repeat purchase. It's not the best measure of word of mouth success, but it is the most established. There is very little point in anybody in the customer experience area saying we are not going to do NPS if the client wants NPS. It's just not a battle that's worth fighting because it is so embedded. If you think another measure is better, add the other measure to the study. So I'm hesitant to say this started in 2013 because some people were measuring it much earlier, but it became much more talked about from about 2010, 2013, 2015. Focusing instead on the effort that it took to make that purchase, to use the online service, to sign up for a newsletter. And the customer effort score doesn't have just one version, so you can ask it 0 to 10, strongly disagree to strongly agree. We can use the emoticons. There is a useful book talking about why the effortless experience is so important. I certainly recommend having a look at that. And that was another dimension to the customer experience. This is a really important book. The first edition came out just before the year 2000 from Pine and Gilmore. It's been updated a couple of times. The most recent update, 2019. And it challenges to rethink the way that commerce and the economy and the world is organized. So goods and products, services and experience. In the early stages of capitalism, it was all about the product. Later on, it became more about the service. But both of those are inputs. They're things that are supplied to the customer or the user. The focus of the experience is, what do you as a customer or a user experience? How do you feel about the process? So it changes the focus very much. And it created this phrase which we now hear quite a lot in CX, experience management. And this means delivering the experience that the customer is looking for. It doesn't mean managing the customer. It means finding out what is the right experience and creating that experience and delivering that experience. Another trend that we associate a lot with the last 10 to 15 years is customer centricity. So companies used to be product centric, or they would be technology centric, or they would be design centric. And that has shifted around to being customer centric. Lots of books, lots of advice on customer centricity. And whilst we associate it very much with the last 10 to 15 years, of course, some people have been doing it a lot longer. Jeff Bezos, head of Amazon, talks about a company that obsesses over the customer experience. And that was back in 1999. And we know how successful Amazon has been. But if we go back to the 60s, we get this wonderful quote from Theodore Levitt. People don't want quarter-inch drills, they want quarter-inch holes. So if you're a drill manufacturer and a drill designer, there is no point focusing on the product. What you need to focus on is what is it that the customer wants, and the customer wants quarter-inch holes. So that is what you've got to talk about, that's what you've got to deliver. So that brings us to this rise in CX, customer experience. So what I've got here is just a very simple chart from Google Trends, and it shows that whilst there has always been some reference to customer experience, there's been a real uptick from 2010. And by many accounts, CX is the fastest growing, biggest sector of insights around the globe. And we can see from the picture at the bottom there from Google Trends, customer experience is being talked about just about everywhere, but particularly North America, particularly Europe, particularly Australia. So 2010 was when we at Potentiate launched our first CX project. So we were catching that trend nice and early, which is great. The Customer Experience Professionals Association was launched in 2011, by which time it means that there were sufficient organizations and sufficient expertise to really call it a sector within the business. The customer experience, CX, was by 2011 a clearly identified sector. By 2021, this year, it's estimated the turnover is $9.5 billion US. So it's quite a substantial sector. The forecast is that it's going to double over the next 5 years. So it's going to continue to rise very rapidly. So what is a typical CX program? Well, here is a typical one from the sorts of studies that we run at Potentiate. A washing machine is purchased, delivered and fitted. And this is very quickly followed by a survey from the store. The survey includes, would you recommend it, the NPS question, or an overall satisfaction, or an ease of purchase process question. That is typically the first question because we want to get that before we start biasing the rest of the study. Then we talk to them about what were they happy, or we might talk to them about what were they unhappy about when they were making the purchase and the delivery and the installation. Ask for overall improvement suggestions, and then ask if there's any issue they would like to be contacted about by the store, which is this lack of anonymity point at the end. The process management of the program will include, first of all, creating some key metrics, so the key performance indicators, for example, for the store. And we're going to benchmark those nationally, we're going to benchmark those regionally, and we're going to benchmark them at the store level. So is this store getting better or getting worse? We're going to look at the performance of the delivery installation, benchmarked again nationally, regionally at the store level. We are probably going to look at how did the individuals who made the sale perform? How did the individuals who delivered and installed the washing machine, how did they perform? We're going to identify any red flags or areas of underperformance. We might also have a process to look at what are the drivers of success. What were the characteristics that identified people with the highest scores on overall satisfaction or the net promoter score or whatever it is? What were the drivers that caused the score to be lower? We're going to have data at all levels. So we will know which individuals in the store were responsible for high levels of satisfaction and for low levels of satisfaction. And that's got quite a lot of implications, of course. It might mean additional training for underperforming teams. It might mean additional resources for an underperforming salesperson, and it might mean that they get fired. So there are some real consequences to this lack of anonymity in terms of the CX program. And we're going to create dashboards that allow the client at different levels to see the information. So the store manager is going to be able to see the performance of their team. They're going to be able to see the performance of their store compared with the regional average and the national average. The national manager is going to be able to see all of those averages, but they're also going to be able to see all the individual stores' information as well. And that's a fairly typical CX program. So how do we set about designing a CX program? We've got to decide, are we going to use touch points or are we going to collect an overall picture? So if we are selling somebody a car, we probably only want to have one interaction with them from a customer satisfaction point of view. We might go for two. So one when they buy the car, two for the delivery of the car. So that might be more of a touch point survey. On the other hand, if we are talking about satisfaction with a large grocery retailer, we don't want to trigger a survey every time they buy something from that retailer. So we are going to use something which is more periodic, more overall. Is it a performance audit? So are we simply trying to find out how good are all the different components, or is it part of a plan to improve the customer experience? Now, for those of you from a traditional market research background, you might be surprised to hear mostly it's a performance audit. People have decided what the dealers should be offering, what the store should be offering, what the bank should be offering, and the CX program is used to measure whether that is happening. The more forward-looking are using the CX program to say, how do we continue to evolve the brand to deliver a better customer experience? We want to balance engagement, so we'd like to have a really fun, really short survey. The problem with a really fun, really short survey is we don't get much data. So the people who are in charge of packing the box the washing machine goes into before it's sent for installation would like to get a measurement on the box packing. But if we did that, we would have probably 70 questions on the satisfaction survey, and people would get really bored and they wouldn't fill in the survey. So we have to work out what is the right trade-off for this product and service. Are we going to do it ad hoc? So occasionally we will do a survey about the customer experience. Or are we going to have a study over time where we can compare things, but we're going to use a cross-sectional sample? So come back to our grocery retailer, maybe every month we interview 1,000 people, but they are different people every month. That is what we call cross-sectional. Now that is better than ad hoc, but it's not as good in many ways as longitudinal, where we interview the same people and we can actually look at the patterns that go up and down within customer experience satisfaction. Do people go down and come back up, or do they go down and leave? Are the sort of questions we need to understand. Are we going to try to maximize responses, or do we want the data to be representative of all of our customers? So we can maximize the responses by using lots of different channels, by using incentives, by really pushing it, but that may not give us as representative a sample as doing something more structured. Are we going to use additional sources to understand the customer experience? Are we going to listen to social media? Are we going to do some qualitative dives? Are we going to use online communities to give us a parallel read to the customer experience program, perhaps creating a T-shaped form of the research? How are we going to feed the results back to the business? We're probably going to have a dashboard, we're probably going to have periodic reports, but how can we enable everybody who would benefit from having this information to be able to get it and get it in a form that is useful to them? Now, I've mentioned this earlier, but I think it's worth taking a moment to think about, which is the key differences between what we tend to think of as market research and what we specifically label as CX, customer experience. So market research is traditionally anonymous, and we're using a sample of people to improve the service for everybody. We're not actually trying to improve the service for the people we interviewed. They are a method of us finding out what needs improving, and then we improve it for everybody. CX is often not anonymous. Our target is to gather information to help all customers, just the same as in market research. But another target is to optimize the experience for the people being surveyed. That is why the samples are often much, much larger. Many times the samples for a CX project are much bigger than we need to accurately understand the performance, but it does enable us to tailor the performance to deal with red flags, to deal with problems for customers who didn't have a great experience. So what are the trends in CX today? What I've talked about is how we got to where we are at the moment, but it's an evolving field. Remember I said that it's going to be about twice as big in 5 years' time. So the first is expanding beyond the CX silo. In too many companies, CX is only reported to the ops team, it's reported to the manager of the particular site or service. It could be linked back through to much more of the company and have a strategic input into what is going. We could integrate CX with more data. So we could integrate it with the passive data collection, we could integrate it with social media, we could integrate it with all the transactional data to get a much better 360-degree picture. Many times when I look at a CX program, the focus is on identifying problems and fixing problems. And that's partly because it's in this CX silo. But actually we should be spending even more attention, and a few people are, but not enough, spending more attention on looking at what is good and then trying to replicate that into other branches, other outlets, other offices, other sites. So trying to leverage the best practices to improve the customer satisfaction. But that means feeding that information into the right parts of management and strategy. We also are seeing a few companies now starting to utilize personas. Not everybody wants the same experience. Some people want a chatty, friendly sales experience. Some people want a highly functional, no interaction. So there isn't a single best method of delivering most services. If we can do more work by identifying which experiences different personas are looking for, and then delivering the right experience to the right personas, we will do a better job. And we're seeing this move from CX, customer experience, to HX, human experience. So what do I mean by HX, human experience? It's thinking about people in the round, because quite often when you hear things like path to purchase, it sounds like people are focused on coming to you. They're rotating around your brand and you've got to guide them because that's what they're looking for. Actually, brands rotate around people. We have to find opportunities when we're relevant to people. So what happens to people when they're not our customers, when they're not viewing our channels, when they're not voting for our party, when they're not visiting our restaurant or visiting our museum? We need to understand more about the rest of their life. What is the ongoing experience for those people? So if we think about the washing machine, what is the ongoing use of the machine? How is the experience of having it in your home? What is the experience of the clean clothes that it's delivering? More than just the machine, more than just the purchase. There's this wonderful quote from Seth Godin, which we tend to use quite a lot because we think it really hits to the heart of the human experience. Don't find customers for your products. Find products for your customers. So what you need to do is understand what your customers need and then find out where you can help them. You can't deal with all their needs, but you should find there are some needs that they have that you can help with, and that is your business opportunity to create the right experience. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague who will talk about CX in action.
Thanks so much, Ray. So Ray has shared all about why CX programs first originated and why they're important. I now want to jump in and take you through the key benefits a CX program can deliver your business, as well as some recommendations about how to successfully implement a CX program and take your business on a path to CX maturity. Overall, CX programs drive impact on your business. Specifically, you can increase customer loyalty, advocacy, retention, and acquisition. By having access to live feedback, you can accelerate informed decision making. You can understand what you need to do to improve customer satisfaction. And through effective issue resolution, you can convert detractors to promoters. You can reduce incremental costs by eliminating pain points. Customer-centric innovation can be driven by the insights you'll gain from your CX program. You'll grow revenue, and you'll have a solid foundation for creating a culture of customer centricity. We work extremely closely with our clients to successfully launch and embed CX programs within their businesses. And as part of this, we highlight that a CX program isn't a set and forget activity. While absolutely programs can be set up to be fully automated wherever possible, what's critical is that businesses continue to place emphasis on the ongoing feedback that CX programs offer, the power of which should be fully utilised across the entire organisation. So how can we ensure we achieve this? Firstly, we advocate that making the data accessible across your organisation, primarily through interactive and engaging dashboards that give you the insights that you need. We have a proven approach for implementing dashboards for our clients across all levels of their organisation. Secondly, issue resolution management. Through your CX programs, we highly recommend asking if your customers have had any issues they'd like to be contacted about. We refer to these as hot alerts. It's critical to respond to any hot alerts in a timely way, and the positive impact that these have is incredible. We've seen thousands and thousands of customers being converted from being detractors to promoters through the effective management of issues raised through our CX programs. I mentioned before about CX programs not being a set and forget activity, and a highly effective approach to ensure ongoing monitoring of CX feedback is to have dedicated CX performance review sessions scheduled throughout the year involving key stakeholders across the business. Our account directors provide these sessions and highlight where you're going well, but most importantly, the areas that you need to improve. Identifying pain points and eliminating these is a primary role of your CX program, and in tandem to this, target the areas that your business needs to improve on. Create action plans for resolving issues, give these a time frame, and appoint key personnel to be responsible. I'm absolutely a glass half full person, and while the role of CX programs is to understand the pain points and fix these, there's also a huge opportunity to use a CX program to celebrate the great stuff that's being achieved. For example, doing special shout outs to team members who have received exceptional feedback. Reward those who are delivering exceptional customer experiences, and amplify what you're doing well. CX is well and truly a journey. Implementing a CX program is an excellent start, and by continuing to grow and embed your CX program, you'll go from creating average customer experiences to exceptional customer experiences. Pave the way by engaging your business at all levels and across all teams. Build a customer-centric culture, and be sure to not only measure your CX performance, but also manage your CX performance through hot alert issue resolution, regular reviews, eliminating pain points, and targeting areas for improvement. Introduce CX guiding principles to your business and ensure these are consistently communicated and reinforced. Strive to be exceptional. Thank you so much for listening today. Ray and I would love to hear from you now. Please enter any questions you have through the Q&A tab on your screen, and we will answer these for you now.